Is this the end of Solana, or do they have what it takes to survive this bear market? Now, unfortunately, Solana's lost roughly $700 million in total value locked this year, and if you pair that with the loss of Alameda and FTX, this is going to prove to be one of the toughest challenges that Solana has faced since its inception. Now, in today's video, I want to fully discuss if Solana can survive this bear market and talk about the affiliations that they had to Sam Bankman-Fried, FTX, and Alameda, and also talk about this mass exodus that they're seeing in their TVL, otherwise known as total value locked, will be enough to disrupt their entire economy, because all of this total value locked also integrates with all of the applications that are built on top of Solana. And if we look at price on the price chart, Solana's actually fallen nearly 95% this year alone, which is significantly more than a lot of the other altcoin projects. So if you are interested about the future of Solana and seeing whether or not Solana can survive this, stick around for the entire length of this video, as there will be important information discussed the entire way through. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Brendan, and we make videos just like this one every single week, multiple times a week. Now, to start things off, we have to understand where Solana was at its peak and where it's currently sitting at right now. Because at its peak, Solana had a TVL of roughly $10 billion. And as of just the other day, Solana's TVL, or total value locked, has dropped to nearly $300 million. This means that they have lost $9.7 billion of their TVL, only being left with around $300 million. And this reflects directly into Solana's price as well, because if we look at Solana's price chart over the last year or so, and we measure this out, we can see that Solana is actually down by over 95%. And so if we're measuring this to exactly where we're at right now, Solana is down just over that 95% threshold over the course of around 371 days. So in roughly a year, it's taken Solana to lose 95% of its coin's value, but also the large majority of its TVL as well. Now, after the FTX situation unfolded, Solana lost an additional $700 million in TVL in roughly 2 weeks or so. And a lot of this has to do with Alameda, Sam Bankman-Fried, and FTX all going under. In fact, there's a quote over here from Sam Bankman-Fried where he talks about what's happening, and it's a really disgusting threat, and it's not helping the Solana economy. But what we also need to understand is that the Solana project is completely separated from FTX, meaning that they are indirectly correlated, and we talked about this in one of our previous videos. And so when it goes to FTX holdings and what was indirectly and directly correlated to FTX, there's two ways of breaking this down. There is indirect exposure and direct exposure. And when we're talking about direct exposure, this is things that Sam Bankman-Fried or Alameda or FTX physically owned, or something that was directly correlated to these assets. So something like FTT, the native exchange token of FTX, would be something that is directly exposed to what's happening here, meaning that FTT cannot function. It has no purpose. It has no use case. It cannot work because it is the native token of FTX, the exchange. So if FTX goes under, FTT becomes useless via direct exposure. Now, all of these projects over here, as created by Fortune, what we can see is that there's a lot of projects that are indirectly exposed. So whether this is through an investment or an acquisition or through the social platform that Sam Bankman-Fried was giving these projects, they had indirect exposure because they have their own team, their own working products, their own legal entities. And even if FTX goes to zero, they still have their own blockchain or their own platform or their own project and their own team that can operate without Sam Bankman-Fried ever being in the mix. And so they were just gaining factors from FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried rather than building their entire business model on top of it. So while yes, this is a big hit for Solana, and we can see them right here, and we can also note that their exposure was directly correlated to Alameda's investment category. And so that's something to note from this chart, is that there's a couple of different ways that these assets could have had indirect or direct exposure, and that was through Alameda, FTX, FTX.US, or FTX Ventures. And this one just so happens to fall under the Alameda investments. And so with Alameda and Sam Bankman-Fried being one of the big figures that brought Solana into the light and into the stature of where it's at today, they were a big contributor. They were a big advocate of how Solana got to its popularity. And so now that they are leaving, they're not only losing one of their main spokespeople and one of their big public figures, but they're also losing their largest, I'd say arguably their largest investor as well. And so now what we have is Solana having this 70% drop in TVL. Over the last year or so, it's significantly larger than that, with them losing the large majority of their TVL as well as their token's price value. However, even if FTX goes to zero, and even if they never ever see the light of day again, which it looks like they won't, so we have to understand that Solana is its own project at the end of the day, right? And so there is a risk of indirect exposure here. However, that might not be enough to actually keep Solana from completely failing. And so I think the idea of Solana failing, at least in the short term, is less likely than it just disappearing. Now, will Solana ever get back to its previous stature of a $10 billion TVL? That is a whole separate question. And so I think the real question is, will Solana ever become the giant that it once was? And ultimately, I think that the answer to that is probably not. Because again, they have lost so much. They've lost a lot of trust. They've lost a lot of resources just because of the indirect exposure that they had to Alameda. It hurt a lot of people. It burnt a lot of people, and people don't really want anything to do with anything that Alameda had their hands in because of the amount of disrespect and the lack of trust that Alameda conveyed after everything went to zero. And so with a lot of these assets, again, some are going to be affected more than others. In this case, Solana was one of the bigger indirect exposure holdings of Alameda. And it's a really unfortunate situation. So a lot of these platforms are going to make out okay. Other ones are going to get hit harder, and some of them are going to go to zero. So do I think that Solana is a dead project? The short answer is no. I don't think that they're a dead project. I think that they can survive this bear market. However, I think it's very questionable and probably less likely that they will ever get back to where they were at their peak. I think that they are going to be a shadow of what they once were. It's possible for them to build trust and to get back to that point, but we have to understand that Solana was one of the more centralized blockchains, and because of that, there is going to be this association with the people who cause the market harm, and there's going to be a little bit of bad taste in people's mouth, and they don't want to associate with something that Alameda had previously large investments in. So it's a tough one, right? A lot of people love the Solana ecosystem, they love the NFTs, they love the infrastructure, but when we go and we read through this article and we see that essentially that decentralized finance or DeFi applications on Solana stored nearly $10 billion or contributed $10 billion to the Solana network, we're not seeing those numbers on the Solana network anymore, which shows that things just, again, they're not where they were. And it's a really unfortunate situation. So that's what I think about this entire situation. Again, do I think Solana is going to zero tomorrow? I don't think so. I think it has a fighting chance because they have their own team and their own product. And even if FTX never sees the light of day again, then that doesn't mean that the Solana layer 1 has to go offline. Even though they are, on a side note, even though they are notorious for doing that just on their own. But that's a whole separate debate. But I hope you guys did enjoy this video. I hope you did like this. Let me know if you agree with me or not. I know a lot of Solana fans are probably going to be mad at this video, but it's just the cold, honest truth of what I think about the situation. There's a lot of analysts that think that Solana is now a useless and dead chain. There's a lot of people who think that it will get back to its all-time high. I'm more on the side of in between. I'm a very kind of middle ground here, understanding that Solana can fully function without FTX. However, I think that the fall of Alameda, FTX, and Sam Bankman-Fried is going to be a big hit for Solana and something that they're going to really have to work to recover from. It's not something that they're just going to be able to lackadaisically just kind of go through the motions, and a year from now they're going to be back at a $10 billion TVL. So it's going to be something that they have to work for, and it's just a matter of if they want it enough at the end of the day, and if they have a proper game plan to get back to that point. So again, I hope all of you did enjoy the video. If you did, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Again, we have content coming out just like this one every single week, multiple times a week. So if you're not a part of the community, you definitely should be. And if you want to check out any of the links that I have in the description down below, feel free to check those out as well. So thanks all of you for tuning in, and I will see all of you in next week's video.